Doing there, Ryan?
Hi, Arthur. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you.
Sorry, let me start my video. There we go.
Okay.
All right. Much appreciated. Thank you again.
Oh, I remember you. Okay, good. Yeah.
Yeah, I
recognize you.
used to cover Hermosa, and then with the pandemic, a lot of Easy Reader staff got laid off, so things have been pretty different.
Ooh, geez. Okay.
Yeah. But tough for everybody right now.
All right. We're all having to adapt. Stay together, pull apart, or whatever it is. Sorry.
Yeah. So I guess my first question would be, do you still maintain the Beach Cities Republicans Facebook page?
So I'm not responsible for that. I'm no longer the president of that club. You're going to have to talk to Steve Wytalk.
Okay.
He's the new president for that club. I am running I'm running for president of the Torrance Lomita Palos Verdes Republican Assembly. So
okay.
Those are the two partisan activist Republican clubs in the South Bay right now.
Okay.
There's also oh, God forbid, I can't forget the Republican Women Federated. There's other groups too. Those are the three on the mind.
Yeah, I've reached out to the Republican Women Federated, not heard back from them, and then I'm supposed to talk to the Central Committee for the 66th District tomorrow. I
see. Okay. If you don't mind my asking, you said that you've spoken to some other Republicans who have said they don't like my style, or could you explain?
Sure. So they basically said, that they feel that your candidacy was harmful to the Republican Party, both its performance in this election and its ability to lure and expand votership in future elections.
Well, that's really interesting because first of all, I got a larger raw number of votes. I
noticed that. Yeah.
You see, you know how to count. I mean, I'm just joking, but of course you see that.
Yeah.
I got 37% of the vote. Frank Scotto got 39.5% of the vote. I spent $4,500. That's it. $4,500. Frank Scotto's campaign spent $1,500,000.
Jeez.
They had an office. They had volunteers. They had the endorsement of the Torrance Police Officers Association. I had the endorsement of City Councilman Aurelio Matucci. I had the endorsement of Hector Gastelum. He's on the water board in Otay Mesa and Chula Vista. I also had the endorsement of Mr. Ward Connerly.
Yes, the UC Regent.
That's correct. And he was the brains and the
209.
Behind Prop 209. Yes. Yeah. And by the way, he was fully familiar with all of my, I am staunchly and openly socially conservative as well as fiscally conservative. He was fully aware of my views and backed me up 100%. In fact, I have formed a relationship with one of his surrogates, Janice Camarena. She was a key individual. She's she married a Hispanic, her husband, very young, her Hispanic husband. She is a mixture of identities. I don't know her full background. Her husband died young, sadly. But she's now in Idaho. So is Mr. Ward Connerly, I believe. So I had a considerable array of people backing me up. I mean, it's a small array, but we had elected officials and we had statesmen who backed up my campaign. Let me go back really, excuse me, just give me a sec here. I want to go to some of the comments you had made. Thanks for bearing with me.
No problem, take your time.
Yeah, so, okay. So I find that, it's, you just look at the evidence. I didn't have the endorsement of the county or the state party either. And I did well considering all of those obstacles. And I think that says a lot. I've been a whistleblower on some of the corruption that was going on in the county and in the state party. If you talk about the relationship that's going on, there's a lot of people, not just myself. There were an unprecedented number of races, assembly, state senate, and even congressional seats where there wasn't a Republican, unless in the 66, the Central Committee, one of their they have three abilities. It is raise money, register voters, and run candidates. They did not have a candidate for this assembly seat. Al Muratsuchi was basically going to inherit this seat without a fight. And there
No.
were residents in this district, and there were supporters outside of the district who said, Arthur, why don't you run? We know you care about this district. We know your values. You care about your policies. We know you care about family, faith, family, freedom. I support the president. I support the president openly. I feel that I'm going to be dovetailing, you ask questions to serve as a guide. That's totally appropriate, but I'm going to follow from some of the things you had written down.
Please, please.
I understand, I supported David Hadley in 2014. I wrote a letter on his behalf for the Easy Reader. You all printed it in October. I supported him in 2016. I even joined the South Bay 300. I had the money to donate 500, and that was tough for me. South Bay 300, donate 500 to join. I couldn't join the South Bay 100. And, I didn't agree with David Hadley on everything. I think it was a mistake, looking back on it, for him to denounce President Trump, Donald Trump. He won the election. It's difficult. I mean, because you've got a problem. The Republican Party has, I feel, for the last 30 years, it's been kind of riding on the coattails of Ronald Reagan. The Torrance Lameda Republican Assembly, I love it. They're an activist group. They get out there, they do stuff. That's why I want to help lead them. They've invited me, in fact, some of the members invited me to run. They still have the picture of Ronald Reagan, the conscience of the Republican Party, to maintain the conservative bona fides. But the problem is that you can't just celebrate what you did. The culture needs confrontation. It needs community. We have to reach out to people. We have to make the case for our values. Democrats, they don't just win elections, they shape the culture. They get into the schools, they get into the universities, they push their progressive leftist agenda. I mean, we have college students coming out of universities now thinking that socialism is acceptable. They're being taught that the United States is an inherently racist country, when the nuance about what the framers, and before that what the delegates did in the Continental Congress, Thomas Jefferson wanted to blast King George for furthering the slave trade, but it was taken out because there was no way that the colonies could survive as a separate country if the South went its own way or stayed with Britain. They recognized all the colonies had to leave, and then slowly but surely they began to deal with the slavery issue. Thomas Jefferson wanted to release his slaves. He was not allowed to do so. The reason I'm giving you more of this minute history is only to show you there's so much information that isn't being taught. And Republicans need to step up. We need to be dealing with the education, not just try to run candidates for school board. We need to be offering, we should be going to colleges and making the case for our views. And that's not happening. There's kind of an attitude of kind of resting on our laurels. And things kind of have gone awry. The other thing too, Democrats, they organize. They have a mindset about being activists. Republicans, they vote or they have conferences. And that doesn't win elections. More importantly, it doesn't shape the culture. And we have to give it to them. And I'm not drawing this inspiration on my own. The previous president of the Beach Cities Republicans, his name was Evan Chase. I don't know if you remember him at all. He made the case when he was elected in 2013. He made the case, Democrats shape the culture, Republicans focus on elections. And so September 2018, let's get our campaign going. Then after November, all the Republicans just kind of go off to they just go who knows where. There isn't an organization that stays in place. Here's something else too. As you can see, I decided to wear this. I'm very proud of the work I do for MassResistance. We are the international pro-family group. I said it, I'm a staunch social conservative. I am pro-family, one man, one woman. And, and some Republicans think that's not a good idea. They think that we should accommodate, the promotion of homosexuality, transgenderism, abortion. The funny thing is, the Trump presidency, my goodness, he is like the most pro-life president we've ever had. And you have members of Congress now wanting to repeal Roe v. Wade. This was unthinkable 5 years ago. President Trump shapes the culture. You see what I mean? Make the case for life. Now, the same thing is true. We have to make the case for marriage. We have to make the case for Second Amendment rights. There's a gun control narrative that's gotten very strong in California. We have to fight that. I'm kind of jumping around a little bit, so you're free to go.
Okay.
It's an issue. I got endorsed by the National Rifle Association. I welcomed their endorsement. Frank Scotto did not seek it, and David Hadley did not obtain it. And I looked over the records over the past 20 years. Republicans who had run in the South Bay for the assembly seat, they didn't seek the endorsement. But to me, there are registered Democrats who are gun owners, registered independents. We have a public safety problem now that's gotten worse because police officers are very limited in what they're allowed to do, or they're quitting entirely because of the disrespect to law enforcement. Public safety is at an all-time high as far as a concern. And we have an assemblyman who thinks it's okay to chip away at those rights. The South Bay NRA supported me. And on the flip side, too, we have a responsibility to educate younger people and even our peers. Expanding Second Amendment rights doesn't endanger the public. You show them data. We have to care about people, show that we care about them. That's why we want people to be safe, to be able to protect themselves. Arizona has constitutional carry. You don't even need a permit. The crime rates have gone down. They don't have more gun crime, they have less crime. Same thing is true in Vermont, which is the bluest state in the union. Bernie Sanders is a full-on socialist, and he doesn't mess with the Second Amendment. We have to make the case. We have to reach, we got to talk to people. And that's something I do. So this, I don't want to consider myself like a Trump person. Every candidate is their own. When I ran for state assembly, I didn't say I'm the Trump candidate. That doesn't help people. I have to run my own race. I have to pay attention to my own issues. It was a little difficult because I signed up for the race at the last minute. I still have a job. I work full-time as the organization director for MassResistance. I got to do my job. I wasn't a retiree. Frank Scott retired. I'm not dismissing him. He did his work. He ran a business, and then he had the time to run for office, and I respect that. That's a tough situation. I don't know how we solve that problem. Younger people. I'm 40 years old. I just turned 40 2 days ago. But we have to find a way to help candidates be able to run, younger or older. There was a young man in Lomita. I was trying to mentor him to run for city council. He was 23, but conservative. Why not? So those are kind of issues. Those are some ideas I can throw out right there.
Sure.
The numbers have gone down, but I would say independents have also gone up too.
Yeah.
The state party has really failed. We're not registering voter. The state party is like a larger role. It's the same role as the central committee, but larger. Raise money, register voters, and run candidates. They're not doing it. They're not. I mean, the current chairwoman, Jessica Patterson, she can say, "Oh, we've raised. They have registered more voters, but Democrats outpaced Republicans 2-1." Because they're putting effort and money into it, while the Republican Party isn't. You have individual activists doing it, like Steve Frank. I've registered a few voters myself. I did it here. I've done it in Downey, California. That has to be a choice, an effort. But that's right now what we have in the Republican Party is California is we have a large consultant class. They get behind certain candidates who they know can raise a lot of money. And then they get a large portion of that campaign money for themselves. So it's really just kind of a business for a few people, whereas the candidates who need funding and support don't get it. They don't win. There's no efforts to raise, there's no register voters and outreach, making the case to people. People don't like Donald Trump. Well, part of the reason they don't like Donald Trump is because it's negative 95 to 99% of the time. I mean, I don't have the study off the top of my hands, but they are extensive. It's like propaganda coming from a lot of the corporate media outlets, just negative. They didn't talk about the peace deals that he arranged in Israel, between Israel and other Arab states, for example. Those were monumental developments that helped to create more peace so that we can make sure that our troops don't have to keep going to the Middle East to deal with outbreaks of violence or to deal with potential terrorist threats. We didn't hear enough about how the economic miracle that occurred under the Trump administration for the first 3 years. And even with this COVID-19 outbreak and the lockdowns that ensued, I mean, the president was doing everything he could to assist the American public. And you had a congressional majority of Democrats who stopped, frustrated, blocked attempts to extend COVID-19 relief because they wanted to put in all this voting corruption. They wanted to push all of these progressive left pet projects that had nothing to do with helping American voters. And the vast majority of voters don't hear about it if they're just watching CNN, NBC, CBS. In fact, they've even studied this recently with the Biden, the Trump-Biden contest. At least 17% of Biden supporters or voters, they acknowledge that if they had known about the Hunter Biden scandal with the laptop, his deals with China, the corruption, the illicit images and very prurient images on the laptops, if they had actually known about that, they wouldn't have voted for Joe Biden. This is very destructive. We have a media culture that is propaganda. It's like they're activists disguised as journalists. That's a real problem, and that's a big issue here in California. That's a big issue here even here in the South Bay. You have kids in the schools. You have kids being indoctrinated. There's negative stuff about President Trump. I was in El Segundo with the South Bay Republican Assembly, and you have a couple of high school kids, and they start shouting like nasty epithets at us because we support the president. Like, where is this coming from? They're making these broad generalizations, comparing President Trump to Adolf Hitler or to the Nazis. And I'm like, President Trump has improved relationships with the state of Israel. President Trump's policies in strengthen religious liberties here in the United States. Orthodox Jewish communities voted for Donald Trump by overwhelming numbers. President Trump hasn't rounded up any ethnic group and put them into concentration camps to wipe them out. I mean, it is stunningly outlandish, the amount of propaganda that has that seems to indoctrinated, a cohort of people in the United States. And then, of course, the Charlottesville matter. Oh, Lord. I mean, it was awful what happened to Heather Heyer. Donald Trump made a comment about there were good people on both sides. That had nothing to do with the white supremacists, white nationalists, neo-Nazis, etc. It had everything to do with people for and against the statues. The president explicitly declared that. I am not talking about, I condemn the white supremacists, I condemn the neo-Nazis, I condemn the white nationalists. He did that extensively. He did that in 2000, he's done that in 2004, 2005, and the fact that the media continued to run with this false narrative, very destructive, very harmful to the country. I sat down with two journalism students from Whittier College, and they both said they voted for Hillary. They thought that President Trump was a threat to the First Amendment. They thought he was a threat to the First Amendment, when in fact, I asked them plainly, why do you think that? And they said, well, he says the enemy is the media is the enemy of the people. I said, well, where did he say that? And so then they showed me a New York Times article, and then it was right there in the article from a tweet that he had sent out. It was right there in the tweet. Donald Trump says, it's not the media, it's the fake news media. It's the falsehoods, it's the frauds, it's the distortions. I was just on the phone with an elected official in West Virginia who was forced to resign his seat because he had quoted a remark that someone else had made that was very offensive. And then it was attributed to him as if he had said it. That is a distortion. And that kind of thing happens extensively in the media generally. And it happens to conservatives. It happens to Republicans. Whereas you had Joe Biden says, if you can't tell the difference between me and Trump, then you ain't black. That's pretty racist. And the fact that almost every major media giant ignored that, let him get away with such remarks. This is a guy who Joe Biden had said, poor kids are just as good as white kids. That's pretty damn racist. What, so black and Hispanic kids are automatically poor? These are horrific remarks that were incendiary. And yet there's no pushback from any major media conglomerate. It just shows how corrupt the bias is. And that's what I think soured a lot of voters in the South Bay and around the country about Donald Trump. Republicans have to understand, we have to fight back against that narrative. We have to call it out when it's wrong. And so I'm going to kind of preempt that. I'm kind of switching gears right now.
That's fine.
I've looked at Easy Reader News and I've seen some other stuff. There was this horrific group called the Westboro Baptists. They're awful. Yeah. And they were harassing Redondo Union High School for years. Mm-hmm. And that was awful. I was sick to my stomach. I know the mayor it was before Mayor Brand. I forgot the mayor of Redondo Beach before him. Now, here's the thing though. This is an example of the media problems. There's a group, I hate to say it to you guys, I'm kind of letting you know, the Westboro Baptists are awful people. You don't protest veterans and their funerals. That's an awful thing. You don't say to people who are struggling with same-sex issues that you're going to hell. You don't condemn. That doesn't help anybody. God hates fags, God hates you. That is hateful stuff. And I have written about that in the Santa Monica newspaper. I can share you that article later on. Unfortunately, you guys quoted another hate group in order to, now I'm not saying you did it because you didn't write the article, but you quoted another hate group. I don't know if you're aware of this. You need to know about this. The Daily Breeze knows. There's a group called the Southern Poverty Law Center. Have you heard of them?
I am aware of them.
Okay, they are a hate group. I know that sounds kind of strange, but let me explain. Maajid Nawaz, he's a reformist Muslim. He believes in women's rights. He formed a foundation called the Quillette Foundation. The Southern Poverty Law Center equated Maajid Nawaz, a reformist Muslim, with the Ku Klux Klan, the Westboro Baptists, etc. Mr. Nawaz sued the Southern Poverty Law Center for defamation, and he won a $3.8 million settlement. Very serious. Also, I need to talk about this because this goes into the larger issue. Why is there such negativity about Trump? The other thing, do you know about the Jewish Defense League? Have you heard of them?
I do, yes.
Now, regardless, I've actually spoken to Orthodox Jews in New Jersey and in Massachusetts. My organization, MassResistance, was founded by an Orthodox Jew. That was a group that was formed to protect themselves from white nationalists, white supremacist, Islamic militants. I'm not saying every Muslim is a militant. I want to be very clear about that.
No.
The Southern Poverty Law Center calls the Jewish Defense League a hate group. Jewish people who want to defend themselves, that is not a hate group. That is a principled self-defense mechanism. That's appropriate. Now, if a couple of members said something offhand or perverse, that's a different matter. But I spoke to the Orthodox Jewish communities in New Jersey about this, where the Jewish Defense League used to operate. My point is, and I have to bring this up, because my organization, MassResistance, we are an activist organization, and this is one of the reasons why some of the Republicans don't like me. They don't like that I'm an activist, that I'm confronting the culture, that we don't want to put up with sexual perversion being pushed on our kids in the schools, that we don't want to put up with the hateful, false narratives of Black Lives Matter, which is harassing the Torrance City Council, which has been harassing El Segundo. We had a lot of residents who reached out to MassResistance saying, we've got this Black Lives Matter group, they're saying all these lies. I've spoken to Black residents who live in El Segundo many years. They never had a problem in the city. And then you have this activist group showing up wanting to harass them. And I have to bring this up. This is very important to me because, the organization I work for we've been smeared by that hate group in Alabama, the Southern Poverty Law Center. They called us a hate group because we believe in protecting children, because we believe in protecting the sanctity of marriage, because we believe in protecting the biological distinctions of male and female. And you need to understand, and there's an expectation, I'm kind of putting you on the spot here. There's an expectation that when you report, that you report honestly, and that you don't give them, you shouldn't be, I have to tell you the outset, the Southern Poverty Law Center is a hate group. You should not be using them. And that's an expectation I have. I'm very happy to report, I spoke with Dave Rosenberg, I believe his name is. He's a reporter with the Daily Breeze. And I think I got it right. I don't know. I mean, I know you guys are competitors of a sort, but
I know him, yeah.
That's fine. I'm assuming there's a comity or a friendship nonetheless.
Oh, totally, yeah.
Because you're professionals. And I was able to share everything with him that I've shared with you. And because of what I shared with him, they don't reference the SPLC anymore. And so that's kind of a caveat. That's an expectation I have with you. I have it with every reporter.
Sure.
And this is part of the problem that conservatives in general also face. And I'm tying it back into the South Bay. I'm tying it back into the Republican Party, the problems that the Central Committee has, et cetera. Rather than confronting issues, wanting to shape the culture, wanting to change minds, they want to accommodate what's going on. They want to just try to appease everybody and just hope that they can get by being just a little bit less liberal than the Democratic nominee or the Democratic incumbent. And we're at a point, especially here in the South Bay, where that's not going to work anymore. We have Black Lives Matter harassing residents in the city of Torrance at the city council meetings. It's gotten so bad. I spoke to one of the school board members. They have instructed all the high schools that the students, this was before the COVID-19 lockdown occurred. They instructed the students, the high schools, not to assign the high school seniors to go to the city council meetings because it was becoming so vicious and hostile because of the Black Lives Matter abuses. This is a real problem. And this isn't going to get solved if elected officials are looking to try to offend the fewest number of people possible, hoping to get a slightly greater advantage in the election and win by being a little bit less liberal. We have to be clear about our values. We have to pick our fights. We have to focus on the issues that we care about. Aurelio Matucci, he ran twice. The second time, he was able to unseat an incumbent in the Torres City Council election. Mr. Franklin in Manhattan Beach, I understand that he's a conservative, and I don't think he's within the machine, or I don't know Manhattan Beach politics as well, but I don't know if he was endorsed by the incumbents who got elected. I don't know. I do know that there were members at the South Bay rally. I think you were at that rally on October 25th. There was a Trump caravan.
Kevin was taking pictures. I was not there, but yes.
Yeah, so residents from Manhattan Beach were saying vote for Franklin. I think it's Joe Franklin. I forgot his first name.
Yeah, Joe Franklin.
And he got elected. We need conservatives to make their case, connect with the communities, and stand on their convictions. Shake the culture. That's how we win again. And it's going to take some time.
Sure.
It's work. Democrats have worked very hard doing what they do, and Republicans need to do the same. I've sat down with labor union leaders, learning how they organize. Conservatives need to do the same thing. I'm very happy to share there are members of labor unions, leadership as well as membership. They support President Trump. They support conservative values. They love what I do for MassResistance. It's really impressive. I remember you were there at the 2018 town hall when what's his name? When Villanueva was there.
Villanueva, yes.
And you know what? That's the kind of thing that conservatives need to do more of. I confronted him aggressively. This is a guy who put illegal aliens with such a high priority that he wanted to disregard ICE, which makes our communities less safe. Conservatives need to be comfortable with that confrontation, and right now they haven't been willing to do that. Unfortunately, with ballot harvesting and all the vote issues in the county, I think that's how Villanueva was able to pull it off. Republicans need to start running candidates. We now have a George Soros-backed district attorney who has phased out cash bail and is going to disregard low-level misdemeanors. Those are quality of life issues that matter. And these are the policies that he did in San Francisco, and now we have it here in LA County. But here's part of the problem. The county didn't even run a candidate at all. There was no Republican. This is not acceptable. So I think there needs to be an attitude of we can win, but there has to be an attitude of this is going to take a while, and we've got to start local again. We've got to win local elections again. We've got to make our case. But, at the very least, Republicans have to be saying, I care about the issues you care about. I'm where you are. I'm listening to you. They have to. Aurelio Matucci, back to him. He started the Unified Small Business Alliance that gave a support for the small business community here in the South Bay. Residents were up in arms about the coyote situation. Their pets, we've had an unprecedented number of pets killed by coyotes. And Torrance went a different path. Rather than embracing, learn to live with it, they've taken an aggressive approach to trap and kill. And you know what? You got to do it. It's not popular. You have animal rights activists who harass the city council, but they're now discussing an extension of the policy to trap all year. And it has saved pets, and it has ensured the safety of, passersby in the community. I've shared a lot of stuff, so I want to make sure. Go ahead.
No problem. And thank you. And before I get into further questions, I just want to address your point about the SPLC and sort of speak generally. First of all, it's not my call how the Easy Reader refers to or considers the SPLC. That would be a decision on the basis of my editor. I will say that, I take what you're saying seriously, and so far I do think you've made some good points, and I understand the feeling that you have of not being taken seriously. That being said, I will look into the claims that you've made. It is, okay. I'm just going to be honest. The SPLC has been around for decades and has done
early 1970s
that is respected on a bipartisan basis within the legal field.
What work have they done that's been respected, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm thinking specifically of their lawsuits against white nationalist groups in the early 2000s.
Okay, so let me respond to that. I
Okay.
have to respond to this because
That's
this
fine.
is something, you are a different caliber of journalist, and I hope it reflects that way. I would also challenge you on the issue about editors. Well, I'm
Yeah.
giving you the point. Dave Rosenberg didn't mention them anymore. They don't mention them. MassResistance, we protested Black Lives Matter in El Segundo, and they wisely and appropriately didn't reference that hate group. You know about Morris Dees. He's the founder, co-founder. Oh, I'm sorry. He used to be. Did you know he got fired?
I did not.
Oh, well, we got to talk about that.
I'm just going to say, like, I don't even envision SPLC coming up in this story.
I'm sorry, say it again.
I don't envision the Southern Poverty Law Center coming up in the story.
I feel compelled to do this because this is
that's fine. Go ahead.
This is on behalf of other conservatives. This is
then I will listen. Go ahead.
Okay, I really appreciate it. You have to understand something. Morris Dees was fired as the president or the co-founder. This is a guy for decades. They made this argument. Supposedly, they were, they were trying to fight for the little guy, fight for minorities. Minorities were routinely abused and harassed in his organization. They were passed over for promotions. Dees was ultimately fired for sexual harassment against employees. Not only that, but the legal director, Lawrence Brownstein, I might be getting her, or Lauren Brownstein, and then you have Richard Cohen. He was the president. They were all forced to resign. You can read a tell-all. It's in the New Yorker by a guy named Bob Moser. I don't know if you know about him. He's a liberal journalist. He used to work for the SPLC, and he said this was a total fraud. They never fought to really help civil rights. I know this is shocking, but this needs to be told because this is a corruption that's hurt conservatives. It's a corrupt, hateful organization. I need to point out their new president, her name is Margaret Wong or Peggy Wong. She took a photo with a gentleman named Nick Cannon. Do you know about Nick Cannon?
The name does sound familiar.
America's Got Talent. He used to be
yes.
The same Nick Cannon who said that Jews are savages. The same Nick Cannon who said that white people are savages. She is okay with that, and she's now the president of the SPLC. I'm sorry, but they're not a civil rights organization. Why are they raising hundreds of millions of dollars and putting it into an offshore account? How does that help Black and Hispanic people? Last thing, I promise, because I know you have another article.
No, that's fine. I mean, I guess I just want to say, like, number one, the SPLC is not going to come up. But, I guess, sort of more to your point, I mean, like, with regards to, like, what you brought up about, like, I'm just telling you right off the bat, like, I'm not going to, the thing you brought up about Thomas Jefferson, for example. I mean, like, there's a argument to be, like, a very strong argument to be made, and what I would say is probably the dominant interpretation that the reason that that portion of the, like, Declaration of Independence about getting rid of slavery was taken away is that the people who were in charge in the writing of the Declaration, or at least the people who had more power, wanted slavery to continue, and that it's possible to consider the United States founding as tied to slavery because of that. I guess, and again, we're not going to talk about the SPLC. We're certainly not going to be talking about Thomas Jefferson in this story. My point is more that, like, I'm taking what you're saying seriously, but that, like, I do, like, I just want to make sure is it right to say that, like, you think that the reason that, to the extent Republican ideas have fallen out of favor, it is because Democrats have been able to, like, brainwash people?
That, I would say indoctrinate.
Okay.
And we've seen that in the schools. We're seeing that with the Black Lives Matter promotionalism. Our organization was very effective at removing the BLM promotionalism at Madrona Middle School and at West High School. I live near West High. Okay, I'm giving myself away just a little bit. For example, I mean, we have kids. There's an organization in Santa Barbara that sued the school district. They were pushing this critical race theory program. You have white students coming home in tears wanting to kill themselves because they think that being white has caused all these problems. And it's just not so. I mean, this is racism. And not only that, but the program at Santa Barbara Unified was only taught to the Hispanic students. It was not taught to Black, Asian, or there were like specific parts of the program. I might be getting some of the details wrong, but I can get the lawyer in touch with you who is suing the school district. It's discriminatory what they ultimately did. I'm just curious if I may ask regarding
Sure.
what you said about, dominant people who are in power. Do you agree that is that what you believe about the United States? Do you believe
What? The slavery issue?
about the slavery issue, that it was a founding aspect of the country?
I mean, like, I want to like be clear that I'm not like, saying that I believe every word of the 1619 Project just right off the bat.
Okay.
But I guess I would say that, like, I think that both looking at the Declaration and looking at the Constitutional Convention, the influence of like pro-slavery forces is undeniable. Now, I think that it would be foolish to say that everyone who signed the Declaration or everyone who supported the Constitution was all about slavery. That's not what I'm saying. I think there were a lot of conflicted people, but the structure of certainly the structure of the Constitution is deeply influenced by people who wanted to protect and preserve the institution of slavery. I don't think it makes sense to say that like the document was about this or that the document wasn't about this, because the convention was signed by, or the Constitution was signed by 54 people. You have 54 different minds. But I think it's just ahistorical to say that everyone there was against slavery and that the point of the United States was to get rid of it.
Oh, I would submit to you, though, just to let you know, Patrick
Sure.
Henry wanted to phase it out. Thomas Jefferson wanted to end
Yeah.
it. They wanted to get rid of it. I don't think the entire discussion, and this is the discussion that Republicans have to have,
Yeah.
by the way. I'm kind of emulating. I'm walking my talk.
That's what I love talking about this, so it's fine.
So, we have to do this, there were the slave states and there were slave interests, but the notion that this country or the document revolves around slavery, I know that's wrong. We have to talk about how there was a principle of liberty. We can talk about the divine elements. God is mentioned 4 times in the Constitution, 4 times in the Declaration of Independence. What were the source of thought for the men who wrote the Constitution, the laws of nature and nature's God? These foundational common law principles are all but disappearing at the college level, and they certainly aren't talked about at the high school level. And what's replacing it is a Marxist, socialist, critical theory narrative. People like Jacques Derrida, people like not Lacan, but Theodor Adorno, the Frankfurt School. These are communistic ideas that see everything as conflict, all the way from Karl Marx, where he looked at history as just a series of conflicts. That's becoming the guiding narrative or meta-narrative throughout colleges and even in high schools. This is a problem. Republicans got to fight this. We've got to fight the culture, not just try to win an election or two. Anyway.
I guess I would say, and so again, like I like talking about this, and I just wanted to be upfront with you that number one, like I don't know how much Thomas Jefferson's going to make it in the story, but like I'm just treating you seriously as a source.
Sure.
I guess I would say, so thinking about this perspective that you have, do you think it's possible that like the reason Republicans are struggling is not because like of this indoctrination effort, but because the like who lives in the South Bay is changing? Like maybe people who might be inclined to agree with Republican ideas for whatever reason have moved out and they've been replaced with people who might think differently in the last 20 years?
You know what? I would actually go back 30 years. And
30 years, okay.
Merit to that, and there are 2 things. Actually, I was actually thinking about this. I'm a history buff, and I've even studied the recent history. I understand you can only do so much. 1992 was a watershed year.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was we won the Cold War. The
Mm-hmm.
Soviet Union collapsed. And so the aerospace industry shrunk considerably. There used to be a considerable aerospace movement in Downey. I still see some of the aerospace aspects, but it's gone, to the best of my knowledge. And so engineers, men and women who work in the veterans or the military industry, or who work in a number of the engineering firms and the aerospace firms, they collapsed, they reduced, a lot of jobs left the area. I would submit to you there's some truth to that. The other thing was the LA riots. Holy crap. I mean, I was a second grader, when the riots broke out, and it was so scary. I mean, all the schools were shut down. I didn't go to school for 2 days. I think it was a Thursday and a Friday that week when the rioting started. And there were people who drove all the way up as far as Palos Verdes. There were some, furtive elements that seemed to have firearms, or, the furtive elements that looked like gangsters that were coming up to the Palos Verdes area. A friend of mine, he stood in the cul-de-sac and he took his gun out and he had it on his holster just to kind of ward off the furtive drivers. They came up and then they drove off again. I actually talked to some people. A lot of people left the area after that. I remember in Palos Verdes, we visited the grocery store. Almost all the shelves were empty. I mean, it almost like what happened at the first part of the COVID-19 outbreak.
Right.
It was kind of a panic gripped the South Bay, and a lot of people left. I do submit, in that regard, yes, but at the same time in the South Bay, there's a lot of families. This is something David Hadley actually talked about. I mean, like Jeff Rizzo, he was a city council member in Torrance. He was born in the house that he still lives in. That kind of a relationship with homes and families. A lot of people have they moved here in the 60s and they've stayed here. I mean, the property values have increased. So there's a stable element in the community. That's why there's that element of conservative, like there's not a big rush. But at the same time, like in El Segundo, Manhattan Beach, Hermosa Beach, you have a lot of wealthy business and entertainment types who have moved into Manhattan Beach, Hermosa Beach. Vince Vaughn lives in Manhattan Beach. I just found out about a couple weeks ago. Jimmy Kimmel lives in Hermosa Beach. That influence, you've got a large liberal business class that has moved into the South Bay. You got to have a lot of money to live here now. I mean, it's very rare to find somebody who you can't buy a home for $200,000 anymore. I mean, forget that. Right. People want to live here. It's great weather. And very wealthy entrepreneurs and sadly, or entertainers, actors, that industry especially has a large liberal element to it. There's a very liberal lawyer who moved into the El Segundo area from New York, and she wants to push her Black Lives Matter agenda. That's the kind of thing that's happening. I have friends of mine in Hermosa and Redondo. They've lived there for decades, and they see the culture changing. They see like outsiders moving in they have like liberal ideas with them. And that's why you see like this aggressive, I think it's an excessive environmental movement. There's the fight going on in Redondo about redoing the marina, I believe it is. So there was a fight over that. In Hermosa Beach, they're pushing in a very aggressive green agenda, which hurts the businesses, which a lot of the old-timey residents are very unhappy. They feel like their city is kind of changing from them. If we're going to talk about demographics, that's it. It's a demographic of ideas, and there's a need to push back. Conservatives can rally if they register voters again, if they start making their case, if they start telling people, this is what the city council is doing to your community, why your sewer. One of the biggest issues, because I was in touch with like Kit Bobco, he was a mayor, not Jeff DeClo, Michael DiVirgilio.
Yes.
Hermosa Beach. He was Democrat, but he was more Republican in his ideology to some extent. I mean, as far as how he would vote on like fiscal issues. And I mean, what they kind of saw them things being out organized. You had like environmental groups coming in, pushing their stuff. Conservatives have to organize back. They're going to have to hustle, and it's going to take some time, but we can do it.
I want to step back just a little bit. So, tell me, take me through a little bit, more of the process of like after you decided to run. Did you try and get support from either the state or the county party or the central committee?
I've had a very unpleasant relationship with the previous county and the central committee. They did really corrupt stuff. They revoked the charter for the Beach Cities Republicans. I know. I
remember that. Yeah.
And you're not getting the whole story. I mean, they called my work, the previous chairman of the Central Committee, she called my work to try to pressure me to cancel a meeting for my club. That's against the law. That's a labor violation. You can't do that. Things like that. And I blew the whistle on it. I said, you can't do this. There was another club, their charter was revoked because they refused to support the gubernatorial nominee in 2014 because he was way too liberal. He had voted for Obama both times. He supported abortion. He supported gun control, all these policies that were completely out of sorts with the party platform. And this kind of retaliatory tactic happens a lot. That's an issue. My campaign manager said, you know what, don't worry about getting the endorsement. I didn't feel like I was going to get it. And I decided, you know what, the most important endorsement is a vote. And I would say, looking back on it, getting 37% of the vote with hardly money and no endorsements. And actually, like, I got substantial endorsements from California Pro-Life Council, NRA, Ward Connerly, a couple of elected officials.
Yeah.
You know, we can be competitive if we stand our ground. Would have been nice to have some help, but oh well.
You know, you kind of addressed this. I just want to make sure I understand it. You know, I've some of the people that I've. Go ahead.
Per the bylaws, I was automatically endorsed by the state party. If you're the Republican nominee, you are endorsed. Those are the rules. Okay. So if the Federal Committee tells you something else, and they probably will, and this is unfortunate, this kind of a dissonance, they're wrong. Now, if the Central Committee didn't want to endorse me, if the county, well, tough, but the state party. But on the other hand, it's like, we got to make our case regardless of party at this point right now. I mean, I don't know what the registration is, 28% Republican, 40% Democrat, and then the rest is independent.
Yeah.
I mean, by the way, I mean, I outdid the registration, you know, at the very least. The Democrats voted for me. There was one candidate who ran for school board, El Camino School Board. Her name was Suzanne. She voted for me. She was a Democrat. She voted for me. She couldn't vote for Al because, I mean, Al Maritsucci was the deciding vote that allows predators to prey on minors, and the judge can keep them off the sex offender registry. I mean, this is just madness. You know, a 14-year-old and a 24-year-old cannot, no, there's no way a 14-year-old can consent to a sexual relationship. And Al Maritsucci defended this. And I'm not crazy here. Lorena Gonzalez, hardcore leftist in the state assembly, opposed the bill openly. She voted against it in committee, and she spoke against it. If I was there in the state assembly, I would go to her office right away. I'd say, you can have all the credit. What can I do to help you so we can change this? I mean, this is how ridiculous it's gotten. Sure. I mean, go ahead.
Sorry. Okay. So, you know, you've kind of answered this. I just want to make sure I understand. So some Republicans that I've spoke to have suggested that the party would have more success if they were to run a candidate who's, you know, perhaps fiscally conservative but more socially liberal, whereas you take pride in being. And I just want to hear, you know, your response to that, whether or not you think that's a good strategy.
Okay, so here's the thing. So it's a two-pronged strategy. We've got to build the case for our social conservative values. That's missing. Okay, we have to start telling people why we're pro-life, and it can't be because the Bible says so. That's not acceptable. I'm pro-life because it's a biological fact. I care about children born and unborn. In fact, when I deal with Black Lives Matter, I'll say to them, I believe Black Lives Matter. I believe all Black lives matter. Do you believe Black babies matter? Black fathers, Black mothers? I make that case. We have a responsibility to restore that value as a matter of science. I had people who were pro-choice and they voted for me. So I also would submit to you that you can be conservative without shoving, you know, but like I said, you pick your fights. When you run on a campaign, if somebody is worried, people were talking to me in the district, they care about the homeless issue. Okay, someone cares about homelessness. I'm not going to talk about abortion. I want to talk about the homelessness issue and how we fix it. We have to deal with mental health issues. Why are we dealing with that? Throwing money at the problem is not the answer. If somebody says, I don't feel safe in my home and I've lived here for 40 years, let's talk about public safety. We don't have to back away from our bona fides as a state party, but there is a longer process. We have a lot of people, I think, and I mean, we're seeing this in the sex ed curricula. Kids are being taught how to get abortions without telling their parents. You see, it goes back to what is being pushed on the kids in the schools. You see what I mean? And there's a responsibility to start dealing with that. It is lazy for Republicans to abandon all of their values so that they can try to win over a couple of liberal voters when voters have the choice to choose somebody who is fully liberal. And unfortunately, that's what happened in this election. I know that, you know, I think it's just intellectually lazy. There's a need to shape the culture, not just focus on winning an election or two. I go back to this. Democrats have been shaping that culture. Democrats lost big in '94. They lost so bad that Republicans took back the state assembly. You'll
Right.
notice Democrats didn't change their tune. They continue to this day, even in the 90s, single payer, government run healthcare, it's on their platform. Why are Republicans changing our platform? We should be changing our tactics, changing our strategies, and changing minds. Governor Christie, and he's not exactly the most conservative governor in the Republican pantheon. Even he said it at the 2012 convention. Real leaders change polls. They don't follow them.
With this idea that the type of person, the idea that the type of person who might be attracted to a, fiscally conservative or but socially liberal candidate, I mean, is it possible that, like a person who was, socially conservative as well as fiscally conservative, you two might have been in the same party 30 years ago, but that now it's not, you or the tactics of the party, but like the parties are just ideologically splitting apart? In the sense that, like, maybe like, so I'll be more specific. So your argument is that, like, the proper way to go about it, the successful way to go about it, is not to, tone down Republican values by running somebody who's fiscally conservative but socially liberal. But I'm suggesting, what if the people who, were Republicans or, are Republicans but didn't vote for Trump and disagree with that? I mean, what if those people are just unsavable? What if those people just might as well be Democrats?
Okay, wow, that's a broad question, and there's a lot of nuance I have to unpack.
Go for it.
So first of all, let's start with like the elephant in the room, so to speak. Steve Kykendel, he was a congressman for one term here in the South Bay, very liberal. That same congressman endorsed Joe Biden and was even part of a PAC. What's going on there? Because I looked into him. He's a consultant, he's a lobbyist. This isn't about ideology. This is about money. Steve Kykendel makes big money off of, with a political class, people like him. I don't have all the details, but that's what I looked up. I could be wrong. You can correct me on this, but what I read about Steve Kykendel is he's now a lobbyist. Jane Harman, she was our congressman for a number of years. She's on a number of panels. She was just removed from a panel recently by President Trump dealing with foreign policy discussions. Donald Trump went to Washington, D.C. to drain the swamp. A lot of bureaucrats left Washington. They have an ideological bent to grow the state and to expand their power and their influence at the expense of the 50 states and their people. We're seeing an ideological distinction that is going beyond Democrat, Republican. It's becoming the people versus the state or the government or the elites, if you will. And this is an issue on both sides. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I don't agree with her on anything, hardly anything. Maybe we might find one or two things we agree on. She ran as very much an outsider. She stuck to her guns. She was strategic, and she won a House seat. If I may be so bold, she's pretty much running the party in Washington. I mean, Nancy Pelosi has to make decisions in part to make sure that she appeases this sharp, strong, progressive left flank. It's getting stronger. That, to me, is the idea that conservatives need to have. We need to have a more populist, down-to-earth, responsive conservatism that cares about your family, your safety, the legacy that you leave, and it's a cultural conservatism that shouldn't be neglected. The challenge we're going to find in the South Bay is that you have a lot of people who, you've got a considerable influential cohort that allies with that politically elitist, very pro-government, wealthy, connected class of people, for lack of a better way to put it. And they're not going to like Trump because their gravy train gets cut off. They don't like the idea of Washington getting smaller because they want to have the connections, they want to have the influence, and they want to have the money. And this, again, reflects the problem we see here in the state party, the California Republican Party. We have a consultant class where they are able to get the people onto the state boards. Jessica Patterson, she's like the epitome of that. She's like a consultant class creature, big time. She put together a Trailblazers program, which was supposed to train Republicans. Nah, most of the money, it went to consultants. Very little went to the candidates. What's going on here? This isn't helping the state. This isn't helping Californians. See, I'm not afraid to call it my own party. That kind of a freedom is becoming a little more pervasive. AOC loves calling out her Democratic colleagues. I call it Republicans too. I don't think Ronald Reagan has that rule, don't speak ill of another conservative. We're not in Reagan's day anymore. We've got serious contentious issues that have to be dealt with. When Reagan and Carter were running, they were discussing inflation. They were discussing the hostage crisis. They were discussing stagflation, very narrow economic issues. They weren't debating baby killing or whether a baby should live or die. They weren't debating infanticide as abortion. They weren't debating the meaning of marriage. They weren't debating these very contentious cultural issues the way that they've become contentious now. We have to do a sharper job of making it very clear. And again, it goes back to, it's not enough to win elections. We've got to restore a love for this country. We have to restore a right respect for our founders, our framers, what they fought for, even if they didn't live up to the values the way we would expect them to. But the values, the principles that they espouse, Declaration, Constitution, those are worth fighting for. And President Trump talked about restoring those values because he recognizes you got to shape the culture, not just win an election. So are those people unsalvageable? I don't think there's a lot of them, for starters. I'm sorry, maybe I meandered a little. I apologize.
No, that's fine. I asked the question.
Someone like Steve Kykendel, he's not principled. That guy has deeper issues. Somebody who has a principled liberal stance on certain issues, that doesn't mean they won't vote Republican. I met a lot of people who were pro-gay rights, quote unquote, for example, who said, I'm voting for Trump because I can't stand the left. Tim Pool is a commentator on YouTube. He's center left. He said, I'm voting for Trump. I don't agree with Trump on a lot of stuff, but I need a real leader who's honest, who loves this country. I even submit to you that people who are culturally conservative don't have to necessarily worry about losing votes. They need to be consistent. They need to have a record of caring about the hardcore issues that people care about in their district. And, I was attentive to that. I cared about stopping the stack and packs. I don't want to see high density housing in the South Bay. I was very attentive to that. I want to deal with the coyote issue. I was attentive to that. I wanted to deal with the public safety issues. I was attentive to that. I care about what the kids are being taught in the schools. Schooling and education is very big here in the South Bay. A lot of people move here. One of the school board members wanted to buy a big house in Lomita. He would have gotten a huge house, but the kids would have to go to LA Unified, which is a very poorly run school district. So he downsized, paid more money, got a house in Torrance to go to the Torrance schools. I was attentive to those issues. I wanted to take David Hadley's proposal to allow cities or communities of interest to break away from LA Unified in a simpler process. Weisburn, it took them 10 years to form their own unified school district. It shouldn't take 10 years, it should take 2. Communities should be able to have as much control as possible over their local schools. If there should be a Lomita Unified, there should be a Gardena Unified. I don't see why not.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. This was, you were very helpful. I appreciate your candor, and I thank you again for your time.
I'm just looking over the 4 things you talked about. Relationship with the county and the state. How the political views of the South Bay have evolved. I think what's happening is you have rich liberals moving in. That's what it is. And you have the conservatives moving out because the jobs have left, the engineering corps, shrunk considerably. I think also going on to the schools. I know I'm just kind of curious. I mean, can you give me a little more detail? You don't have to name names, but who exactly did you talk to? Did you talk to current elected officials, like Republicans who had their views about me?
Some have been people who previously ran for office. Nobody who's currently in office said that. Okay, no,
you haven't talked to current elected officials.
I have. Your status did not come up among those people.
You just spoke to people who have run for office.
I've spoken to both current and former elected officials for this story. The people that I'm who delivered the criticism that I referred to you, as far as I can tell, I don't have all my notes because I've interviewed probably 3 dozen people for the story.
Wow.
So
Okay.
I'd have to be, give my notes for sure. But yeah, I believe right now that it's just former Republican officials or former candidates who made those comments.
Can I invite you to, I've mentioned a few names, like the people who
Yeah.
endorsed me. I'd encourage you to reach out to them. I mean,
that was going to be my last question, actually. Like, is there anybody else that you think I should talk to?
so Aurelio, he endorsed me.
Okay.
I speak to him. Hector Gastelum, because he endorsed me. I can get you in touch with Gord Connerly, because he endorsed me. I feel like, the fact that was so prominent that there was criticism, there needs to be balance, if I may be so bold. Being able to share that. I could also share with you the leaders of our Republican clubs, and they can give you a take. And not only about me, but getting their feedback on those questions, I think would be more than appropriate.
Please.
I will do that. So I will circle back and I will provide that for you too.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yes. All right. This is really good. Geez, do you mind if I ask a few things?
Please, go for it.
Okay. With Easy Reader, you guys have been around for what, 40, 50 years now, or?
51 years.
Okay. And you guys have been, wow, how bad have the layoffs been? I'm sorry to ask. I hope you don't mind.
No, that's okay. It's really hard. Like, times are tough for everyone. I think it was the last issue in March, our editor wrote a note saying that staff had been laid off. I mean, people can think whatever they want about the coronavirus pandemic. The notion that the media is hyping it to boost their bottom line, certainly not the case in local news, because the Easy Reader, our advertising has been gutted because of it. So basically, the paper's making enough money to pay printing costs and a smaller number of employees than we had before, and freelance. But there's not enough advertising revenue to keep. It was tough before. Things have certainly gotten worse. Certainly gotten harder.
Okay. And I'm just kind of interested in your background. I don't know a lot.
Sure.
When did you get hired by the Easy Reader?
I had September 2015 is when I got hired, and then I'd freelanced there for maybe a year or so before that.
Oh, you freelanced before 2015, and then they hired you full time.
Yes.
Okay, that's a good sign. That's good, and they kept you on, so that's a good sign right there.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I ask? It's your case. You're writing a story about me, but
sure.
I did this with the kids at Whittier. They were students, not kids. I apologize. Who did you vote for in the election?
That's just, I never answer that as a journalist.
That's fine. You know what?
I mean, I'm not so foolish as to believe that it's everyone has leanings or biases, if you want to call them. The true test of a journalist, and what I've always been told that I do, is to be able to recognize and correct against them.
Okay, against biases, things like that.
Yes, it's you may you may lean a certain way in your head. The important thing is, when you're writing, do you recognize it and do something to prevent it from making the story unfair?
If you don't mind, because that's a very profound statement. I appreciate that. Do you feel that that's something that's lacking in larger journalism spheres, like with CNN, MSNBC, Breitbart, Fox?
So I think that opinion-oriented journalism has certainly become more popular, and I think that part of that is just laziness on our part in the public, not necessarily laziness among reporters, although that's certainly there. In that it's much easier to consume opinion stories than it is to consume fact stories. It's also more expensive to produce fact-based stories. I mean, as newspapers lose revenue, it's very expensive to maintain, a bureau in Baghdad and a bureau in Beijing and a bureau in Buenos Aires. Those cost money. And when newspapers were making more money before, social media and the internet, they could afford to staff those, and they could put reporters out there. Now, on CNN, it's cheap to have 4, talking heads up there talking about, you know, what they think of the news. It's way cheaper to have that than it is to have like a reporter station all over the world. I think that's part of the reason why it's happening. I like why, you know, that's being produced more. I also think that part of it is that like the internet and social media have made us intellectually lazy. We don't like want to like read a 3,000 word story about environmental policy. We'd rather like look at a tweet about something.
Sure.
That being said, I think there is a pretty broad misunderstanding of how journalists like work and what the culture of newsrooms are. I'm not going to speak to MSNBC or really anything on television. I haven't owned a television for at least 10 years. I don't consume TV news. But I do read newspapers widely.
Do you look at
I don't like to read. I subscribe to newspapers. I don't like to read on the internet because I find that when I read on the internet, I read the news that I'm looking for as opposed to the news that's there.
Okay.
And like, you know, staring me in the face, like more something that's curated. I find that I get surprised more often, and that's what a newspaper is supposed to do. The best sort of stories, you know, like the most frustrating thing to me about the internet and journalism these days is that when people read news, they're looking for news that makes them feel better about an opinion they already have. They're not looking for something that can like, oh wow, maybe I have that wrong. Wow, maybe like I'm, you know, can like my mind can be changed about that. You know, like however you feel about the LA Times or the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, or any newspaper, and that's really all I'm comfortable speaking to because that's the culture and the procedure that I know. The people on the news side are, they care more than anything in the world about not being wrong. And, you know, you may disagree with that, but I'm just saying, like, having spent time in a newspaper, like, they are not sitting there thinking like, man, how are we going to fuck Donald Trump? Like that's just not what's happening.
Well, I got to speak to that. CNN, all those calls, that Project.
And again, I don't watch CNN. I've not had a TV for 10 years. So you may be right about that.
I got to challenge that. I'm sorry. It's not true. I can
okay.
That. But I'm giving you objective evidence. I'm not giving you an opinion. They exposed it. They were pro Joe Biden and they wanted to go negative on Donald Trump. Day after day, Project Veritas has exposed the inner discussions that Jeff Zucker has with his staff. Oh my!
Yeah, I can't speak intelligently to CNN. You may be right about that. I don't know.
CNN actually prints on websites too, by the way, so they do have print media, but it's not.
Yeah, I don't read it.
Well, wait a minute, because you're saying that newspapers, the reporters don't want to promote a certain ideology or a certain set of ideas. You're saying
that's been my experience.
That's been your experience. Well, then how do you explain like the LA Times explicitly endorsing candidates for starters? And how do you explain like, you know, what I just told you about? You know, they go after Donald Trump making this argument that he said, when he said good people on both sides, he was talking about neo-Nazis when he clearly wasn't. How do you reconcile that?
So taking like the 2 points separately, again, like I'm not, again, I don't watch CNN. I don't look at their website. So I don't feel comfortable speaking about their procedures.
They did an awful thing to Steve King. Steve King he's not a racist at all. You know, and then they made him sound like he was defending white supremacy and he wasn't. Steve King, I will say this, is an inartful congressman, to put it mildly. Probably he shouldn't have been talking to the New York Times. And I'll say this about Donald Trump. I don't know why he has Bob Woodward in the White House when Donald Trump will say things like, we wanted to downplay the scare about COVID. I don't blame him. A leader is supposed to inspire confidence and calm to get through a situation. The head of the Navy SEALs will do this. Dan Crenshaw talked about it. Barack Obama did that during the first few years when the swine flu, I believe it was, or H1N1 broke out. And that's funny. That's another example. You have all the newspapers went off on Donald Trump saying it was a Muslim ban. Yet Obama had the same countries on the same list for a travel ban, and nobody gave Barack Obama any crap.
So, I mean, I'm not going to like debate about Obama versus Trump with you. I'm just not. The one thing that I will
I'm getting into the coverage from the press.
Sure. Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? This is like Washington.
But I guess like there's no way for me to do that. If I say that I think the press was accurate, then what that ultimately ends up reflecting is that you and I have different judgments of reality. Like my like I think the press covered it fairly, which means that like Trump that it's wrong. That's what I'm saying.
Fairly, because we talked about a few things. Covered what fairly?
So the first thing I wanted to address is your point about the LA Times endorsing Joe Biden. That's something that's not understood broadly in the public, is that endorsements are made by newspapers' editorial boards, which are something very different from the reporters. The reporters and the editorial boards have no contact. They don't talk. The editorial board is set up for a newspaper to issue what are explicitly opinions. They're not news. They are judgments that the editorial board makes. Reporters are a completely separate entity.
Okay. But you bring up a point that journalists are becoming more opinionated, aren't they?
I think, yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. I don't think all of them are, but that's certainly like the demand for and the prevalence of opinion journalism is without a doubt increasing in our country.
I've got to ask you this question. It is,
sure.
I never get to talk to a reporter like this. So let me ask you this. So there's a reporter, her name is Haley Branson. Okay, and she wrote a hit piece in the LA Times. And I have to bring this up because I think it was David Mendez. Is the name Mendez? Does that sound? I think I'm getting it right.
Former Easy Reader reporter.
Okay, or he was with Easy Reader, I believe.
Yes, I said a former Easy Reader reporter.
Oh, he's gone.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I have to say I'm kind of glad because he referenced the LA Times article that was a hit piece on me that had inaccuracies, and it included that reference to the hate group in Alabama. Do you see? And what I've seen happen in media circles, which is really corrupt, is that you'll have a salacious hit piece in the LA Times, and then other newspapers will just quote the LA Times and go, see, it's true because the LA Times wrote it, but it's not true, or it's not accurate, or biased. And I guess it's a question, are you going to write your own stuff, or are you going to be drawing from other sources?
So I'll answer that. There's a couple things to that. One, like in general, it's considered like you want to, as a newspaper reporter, you always want to independently verify stuff that you write. And like, if it's like, if especially it's like a crime story or something like that, if some other paper wrote something and you put it in there, it's really bad to just see that it's in some other paper and put it as true. It's, it's not quite as bad to, attribute it to the LA Times. That being said, we're just going to disagree here. The LA Times is a newspaper worthy of respect. They do a lot of good stuff. I'm not familiar with the piece that you're talking about, and I'm not familiar in particular with the allegations that you say were untrue. But the LA Times is a good paper. They do a lot of good journalism, and I just cannot accept that it's a completely disreputable and unreliable organ.
Well, here's the thing. They admitted themselves. There was an editorial. Okay, fair enough. But it was also the owner, Patrick. I'm going to pronounce his name, Patrick Sung. I can't pronounce it. Thank you. He admitted that the LA Times is racist. They said it. That it was racist. They said that.
Yeah, I mean, don't really want to go down this path, but you're oversimplifying. It was a extensive, long, both an investigation, or it was actually a series of stories, and it was a long note from Patrick Soon-Shiong.
Okay,
I think you're just oversimplifying.
Am I? I mean, I'm just telling you what they said. It's like we acknowledge our racist past, and then they talk about how we want to focus on. This is from the LA Times. We want to focus on
I read it.
Focusing on you, so you know what I'm talking about. They want to focus on certain minority groups. Now, I don't have a problem writing stories about anybody, but wait a minute, doesn't that conflict with just writing the facts? There's an agenda there. They want to emphasize writing about certain groups. They want to emphasize writing certain topics. They want to emphasize. Sure. Do you see the critical race theory discussion? The rhetoric is there.
So I think I don't have the story in front of me. I did read it. I understand the claim that you're making. The way I understood the LA Times article was that historically, because much of the series of stories that you're referencing
Okay.
was about the LA Times history of like coverage that failed to take into account perspectives of the diverse communities that make up Los Angeles. And I think that that's pretty clear. I mean, and I think that those stories reflected that. As I understood the letter from Dr. Soon Shong, the point was, we had this problem in the past. We're going to try and do better at covering non-white communities in the future. That certainly doesn't mean we're going to like write anti-white stories or not write about white people at all. That's not at all what it was saying.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, I do want to, and I want to be like very clear on something here. I don't,
Sure.
I don't support, I think this is how bad things have gotten in this country, that we've seen such a balkanization. There's a desire not for people to see themselves as Americans. There's been this, not just the hyphenation, but now you have like the Black Lives Matter movement that is aggressively, and it's based on some false, like the George Floyd situation, tragic. That guy was not asphyxiated by the cop. 2 autopsies confirmed that he had cardiac arrest because he had depressants and stimulants running through his system. But what was captured by the press or by social media, which goes to a point you brought up, that social media has really dropped the ball, or it's caused us to be lazy. People just automatically assumed it was police brutality that killed the guy, and it wasn't. The same thing happened with the Michael Brown situation. Michael Brown rushed the cop, but the media put off a narrative. A lot of media organs put off a narrative that the cop killed an unarmed black man. That's not what happened. This is really serious. These are problems. These aren't just ideological.
I think, again, like I respect the point that you're making, but I just don't think we're going to agree here. Unfortunately, like I'm not saying that everything Black Lives Matter says is right, but like to dismiss them in the way that you're doing, I just can't follow you there.
Well, how am I dismissing them then? I want to make sure we understand each other. How do you feel I'm dismissing them?
I mean, you're saying that like their claims about police brutality are not founded in fact.
Well, I mean, Trayvon Martin, for example, there was a court case, and that was the start of Black Lives Matter, not in 2013.
I don't know.
Okay, well, so then you can't make that judgment that I'm wrong.
I didn't say you're wrong. I said we're going to disagree.
But facts matter as a journalist, do they not?
They do, which is why I wouldn't be. My story isn't about whether or not Black Lives Matter is correct about everything they say. I would study the issue further and long before writing such a story.
Okay.
I mean, like I'm just saying, like like you've made in our discussion, you've made points that I respect and that I will obviously incorporate into the story. That being said, I recognize that you disagree, like with other people about Black Lives Matter. I'm not obligated because you feel that way to put that in the story, and I'm not obligated to like represent that as the truth. Now, that being said, you've made a lot of points in here that I think are reasonable, and that you've made points that you don't always get credit for. I'm giving you a compliment there. That being said, like I don't feel bound as a journalist to like be a stenographer for your points of view about Black Lives Matter.
Okay. But here's the thing: a lot of journalists are, in a sense, becoming stenographers for Black Lives Matter, or for the ideologies behind it.
I mean, like, so again, I'm not gonna like discredit the profession, and I'm like with the LA Times, I think we're just gonna disagree. Like, I read the paper every day. I know journalists at the LA Times. It's a great newspaper. They've struggled with budget cuts, and like to the extent that there are problems, I think a lot of it is due to the fact that there are fewer reporters. That is the like greatest weakness of the LA Times. Not that you have people who are out there trying to make stuff up. Now, do I think that there is an increase in opinion-oriented journalism? 100%.
But you don't think the LA Times has that problem?
On the whole, no.
Wow. I can't tell you how much I disagree. And
I mean, like, again, I'm not saying that like you're, like foolish to think that. I know a lot of people, out there do. But I guess it's journalism is like I think it's because people consume it so much and they see it, it's very, you know, easy to think like, ah, yes, I know how it works. But I would say to you that it's more opaque than you think. And like the people who are behind it are overwhelmingly like fair-minded people. They're not out there trying to like cook up some agenda.
But you have an editorial board that clearly endorses liberal candidates, liberal causes.
It has nothing to do with the news side.
About climate change gets extensive coverage as a serious, even though the science is very disputed. See, this is where Republicans have to step up our game of making.
All right, so but that's just, I mean, like this gets to it, and we may not agree here, but like,
and here's the other thing: CNN, true to fact, ABC News, like George Stephanopoulos. The roundtable discussions, many of their discussions come from the newspapers. The newspapers, you know, maybe if I may be so bold, it's because you're in the profession so much, you don't see it. You have to be out.
I mean, I recognize that's a possibility.
As a conservative, as someone who has been defamed by, you know, the LA Times article. And by the way, I didn't tell you about Haley Branson, her mentor. Here's a question. Well, you know, I know you got your time constraints, so do what you got to do if you got to cut this off, but Haley Branson, her mentor was another journalist named Helen Thomas. You know about Helen Thomas, right?
I do know of Helen Thomas, yes.
And why did she end up losing her job or retiring?
I don't know, to be honest.
She said on record, the Jews should get the hell out of Palestine. That is a massive bias. And she was a journalist in the Washington Corps for decades.
I don't really have a response to that, Arthur. Like, I mean, that may be true. It may not be. I mean, it's certainly not relevant to what I'm writing about.
Helen,
and it's not going to change my opinion of the LA Times.
Conservatives are dealing with, and this is what was at the LA Times. You have a reporter, Haley Branson, who gave this eulogy for, if I may be so bold, an anti-Semite. She received awards from Hamas. Helen Thomas, a journalist, supposedly. I'm just telling you, you got to think.
Okay.
Open your mind.
That's you know, a fair point. I'm not familiar with that. Unfortunately, it does not change my mind about the LA Times or Haley Branson.
Okay. Interesting.
But you know, like again, like
do you know her?
I've never met her. I read her stuff all the time.
Well, now you understand what you're reading and the stuff that, you know, she's written about me. She wrote about others. It was pretty shocking. I mean,
I certainly feel bad for anyone who ever has anything, you know, like inaccurate and unflattering written about them in a newspaper. That's like a terrible experience that is my greatest fear as a journalist, and I think it's a lot of journalists' greatest fear. So I'm sorry that happened to you.
Well, I appreciate that, and I just hope, you know, this is part of where Republicans have to step up our game, where we are not just sitting back passively. Donald Trump Jr., I loved how he handled The View. I don't know if you don't watch TV. I understand. Do you watch stuff on YouTube?
Not really, no.
Fair enough. Okay. Honestly, I mean, it's like Denzel Washington. If you don't read the news, you're uninformed. If you do read it, you're misinformed. Now, I mean, that's a broad. That was Denzel Washington as himself. He wasn't playing a part in a movie.
No. I like that. It's pithy.
You know, and I certainly, it sounds to me, and I hope that you go against that grain. And I really hope that, you know, and it goes back to, again, that the hate group in Alabama I mentioned to you, Southern Poverty Law Center. It is a biased organization. I didn't mention to you this. They tried to shut down charter schools that serve Black students. I don't know if you knew about that. There was an editorial in one of the local papers. But do you see what I'm saying? This larger issue of there is a substantive bias. It's hurt Republicans. It hurt Donald Trump. This is something that Republicans and conservatives have to get smart about fighting against. And I'm one of those who does it. And the Daily Breeze, with the Daily Breeze, it was not just about the SPLC. When I was at one of the sheriff town halls in Carson, and I had a picture of Marcello Bizzarello, who had been killed by an illegal alien.
Yes.
I was shocked at there were printing mistakes. They didn't mention his name, and they kept writing something. They kept writing anti-immigrant because I oppose illegal immigration and the sanctuary state law. And I had to explicitly correct him. I went all the way to the top of the management. That's not true. I'm not anti-immigrant. I have friends who are immigrants. I protest with immigrants against these open border illegal alien promoting policies. Do you see what I mean? That's a bias that is that's an editorial decision to call people anti-immigrant when they oppose illegal immigration. That's wrong. It's erroneous. It's even libelous. And I corrected that error, and that's been rectified since then. It's pretty good. But do you see what I'm saying? That kind of stuff also gets into the process, and that creates problems.
So again, I'm sorry if you've ever had your views mischaracterized, and I certainly will not do that, and I hope that it doesn't happen to you again.
I appreciate all of it. When's the article going to be published?
Probably either a week or 2 weeks. I'm still waiting, still trying to figure that out. Sort of a space issue.
I totally understand. This is going to be like an extensive article.
Yeah, I've done like I said about 36 interviews so far. So yeah, it's pretty extensive.
I got to make sure I send you a couple of people to interview.
Please, thank you.
Okay, I'll make sure to do that. This is great. I've had all the questions. Do you have any other questions you want to ask me?
No. I'm good. I got in everything I needed. Thank you, though.
Wonderful. All right. Appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
You too, Arthur. Take care. Thank you for your time.
Wonderful.
Bye.
Bye-bye.